When people think of the Bridgerton family, they think of Daphne's fairy tale wedding, Anthony's dramatic pursuit of love, or Benedict's free spirit, Francesca. She is always just there, standing in the background, smiling quietly, saying little. And because she never made a scene, because she never demanded attention, the world simply moved on without her. But here is the thing about quiet people. They feel everything, every single thing. They just never show you, and when life finally breaks them, it breaks them in ways that loud people never experience, because loud people let their pain out, quiet people carry it. They fold it neatly inside their chest and keep walking like nothing happened. Francesca Bridgerton carried more pain than any of her siblings ever had to. She found love, real love. The kind that makes you feel completely understood without having to explain yourself. And then she lost it. Not slowly, not with time to prepare. Just gone. One morning the person who made her feel whole was no longer there. This is not a love story with a happy ending wrapped in a bow. This is a story about what happens after the happily ever after gets taken from you. This is the saddest love story in all of Bridgerton. And most people completely missed it. Asterisk, if you have watched Bridgerton from the very beginning, you already know that the Bridgerton family is loud. They are warm, they are loving, they are dramatic. And they fill every room they walk into. Daphne turns heads, Anthony commands respect, Benedict charms everyone around him, Colin makes people laugh, Eloise argues passionately about everything. Even the younger ones have a spark that draws your eyes to them. And then there is Francesca. She sits at the dinner table and listens. She attends the balls and observes. She watches her siblings fall in love, make mistakes, chase each other across ballrooms and drawing rooms, and she does not say very much about any of it. People around her often assume she is fine because she never complains. They assume she is happy because she is never visibly upset. But assumption is not the same as understanding. And nobody in that family, as much as they loved her, truly understood what was going on inside Francesca's head. She was not cold. She was not unfeeling. She simply experienced the world differently from the rest of them. Where her siblings wore their hearts on the outside, Francesca kept hers somewhere, deep and private. She thought carefully before speaking. She chose her words slowly. She found large crowds exhausting rather than exciting. A quiet evening with one person she trusted meant more to her than any glittering party full of strangers trying to impress each other. This made her the odd one out in a family of extroverts. Not because anyone was cruel to her or left her out on purpose, but because the world naturally moves toward the loudest voices in the room, and Francesca was never the loudest voice. She was the one sitting by the window, watching the rain, perfectly content in her own company, while everyone else danced out. What she wanted from life was simple. She was not chasing titles or wealth or the most powerful match in London. She just wanted someone who understood her. Someone who did not need her to be louder or funnier or more exciting than she already was. Someone who would sit beside her in comfortable silence and feel like that was enough. That was all she asked for, just someone who got it. Asterisk, imagine spending your whole life in a room full of people who speak a language you do not quite understand. Not because you are not smart enough, not because you are broken in some way, but simply because the way they communicate was never built for someone like you. Now imagine that one day, without any warning, without any grand announcement, someone walks into that room and just gets it. They do not need you to translate yourself. They do not need you to be louder or softer or different. They simply look at you and understand. That is what John Sterling was to Francesca Bridgerton. He did not arrive in her life with fireworks. There was no dramatic carriage chase. No rain-soaked confession in the middle of a garden. No shouting across a crowded ballroom. That was never going to be Francesca's story anyway. Instead, John came in quietly, steadily, the way the right things in life usually do, so gently that you almost miss them. He was the Earl of Kilmartin, calm by nature. grounded in a way that most men in London society simply were not. Where other men of his position performed their charm like it was a job, John was just himself. Easy to talk to, easy to be around. He did not fill silences with noise just to avoid feeling them. He could sit in a quiet room and feel perfectly comfortable. Which meant that for the first time in her life, Francesca did not feel like a problem to be solved. Their courtship was not the kind that poets write about. There were no grand gestures, no stolen glances across a crowded room that set everyone whispering. What they had was something far more rare and far harder to find. They had ease, genuine, unforced, completely natural ease with each other. Conversation between them did not feel like work. Silence between them did not feel awkward. They simply fit together the way two people sometimes do when the universe gets it exactly right. Francesca, who had always been so careful with her words, found herself talking to John in a way she had never talked to anyone before, not because he pushed her to open up, but because he never made her feel like staying closed was a problem. He was patient without being pitying. He was kind without being soft. And slowly, without either of them making a big deal of it, she let him in, all the way in, to the parts of herself she had never shown anyone. They married, and what they built together was exactly what Francesca had always quietly dreamed of: a life in Scotland, away from the noise of London, away from the pressure of the season and the gossip and the endless performance of it all. A home that felt like breathing out after holding your breath for years. John gave her space when she needed it and closeness when she wanted it, and he somehow always knew the difference without her having to say a word. There was only one shadow hanging over their happiness. Try as they might, Francesca could not fall pregnant. For a woman in that era, that carried a weight that went far beyond personal heartbreak. It touched her sense of purpose, her identity, her place in the world she lived in, and it hurt. It hurt both of them deeply, but even in that pain, they did not pull away from each other. They sat inside that sadness together. They carried it together, and their love did not crack under the pressure. If anything, it held tighter. That is the thing about what Francesca and John had. It was not perfect. No real love ever is. But it was solid. It was safe. It was the kind of love that does not need applause because it was never built for an audience. It was built for two people who finally stopped feeling alone in the world. Asterisk not the pain that makes you scream or collapse or throw things across the room. Not the pain that other people can see on your face and immediately rush toward. This is the other kind, the kind that sits so deep inside you that it has no way of coming out. The kind that just stays there, heavy and still, like a stone dropped to the bottom of a lake. Nobody sees it sink. The water just closes over it and the surface looks calm again. But the stone is still there. It never moves. That is the kind. A pain Francesca Bridgerton lived with after John died. He did not die at the end of a long illness that gave them time to prepare. He did not die after a fight or a journey gone wrong or any of the dramatic circumstances that stories usually dress death up in. He died in the night, quietly, the way he had lived. Actually, one evening he was there, warm and real and hers, and the next morning he simply was not. No warning, no goodbye, no final conversation where she could have told him everything she still had left to say. Think about what that does to a person like Francesca. She had spent her entire life being careful. Careful with her words, careful with her feelings, careful about who she let in. And the one time she let someone all the way in, completely and without reservation. The one time she allowed herself to believe that this was it, that this was her person and her life and her future. It was taken from her overnight, not slowly, not with mercy, just gone. The cruelest part was not even the loss itself. The cruelest part was that they had barely even started. They had found each other, built something real, weathered the heartbreak of not being able to have children, and come out the other side still standing, still choosing each other every single day. They were supposed to have decades. They were supposed to grow old in that quiet Scottish life they had built together. They had so much time ahead of them, or so they believed, and then they had none. People around Francesca expected grief to look a certain way. They expected tears at dinner and long stretches of staying in bed and the kind of visible suffering that signals to the world that you are broken. And maybe some of that happened behind closed doors, in the private hours when no one was watching. But in front of others, Francesca went quiet in a way that was almost frightening, not cold, not numb exactly, just absent. Like the part of her that knew how to be present in the world had stepped back somewhere unreachable and was not sure how to come forward again. Her family did not fully know what to do with that. The Bridgertons were built for action. When something was wrong, they fixed it. When someone was hurting, they swooped in with noise and warmth and love and effort. But Francesca's grief was not something that could be swooped in on. It did not respond to noise. It lived in the silence, which was exactly where no one could follow her. She went through the motions of existing. She ate, she dressed, she responded when spoken to. She was technically present in every room she walked into, but anyone who looked closely enough could see that something essential was missing. The particular stillness she had always carried was still there, but it was different now. Before John, her stillness had been peaceful. After him, it was hollow. And here is where so many people who watched her story completely missed the point. Some said she moved on too quickly. Some raised an eyebrow at the choices she made in the months and years that followed. They watched her keep living and assumed that meant she had left John behind. But grief does not work that way. And Francesca is proof of it. She did not leave John behind. She could not have, even if she tried. He was woven into the person she had become. Every version of herself that came after him was built on top of what he gave her. She kept living because she had no other choice. Because the alternative was to stop entirely, and something in her, some quiet, stubborn part buried underneath all that pain, refused to do that. But living and healing are not the same thing. And moving forward is not the same as moving on. Francesca moved forward carrying every single piece of John Sterling with her. The love did not go away. The loss did not shrink. She simply learned, slowly and painfully, how to walk with the weight of both at the same time. That is not a small thing. That is one of the hardest things a human being can ever be asked to do, and Francesca did it alone in silence, without asking anyone to notice. Asterisk, there is something almost unbearably cruel about what life handed Francesca next. She had already done the hardest thing. She had loved completely, lost everything, and somehow kept breathing through it all. She had earned the right to simply exist in her grief without the universe complicating things further. But life is not that considerate, and the next chapter of Francesca's story did not come in the form of peace or rest or a slow, gentle healing. It came in the form of a man she had known all along. A man who had been standing just at the edge of her life the entire time, John's cousin. Michael Sterling. Michael was everything John was not, in the best and worst ways possible. Where John was steady, Michael was restless. Where John was calm, Michael was electric. He moved through the world with a kind of reckless energy that made people pay attention to him whether they wanted to or not. He was charming in a way that felt almost dangerous, like standing too close to a fire because the warmth is worth the risk. And underneath all of that, underneath the easy smiles and the sharp wit and the confidence that filled every room he walked into, there was something else entirely. Something he had been hiding for a very long time. Michael Sterling had been in love with Francesca before John ever died. Let that sit for a moment. He had watched his cousin fall in love with her. He had stood at their wedding. He had watched them build a life together, watched Francesca become happier than he had ever seen her. And he had said nothing, done nothing. Because John was his family, his blood, the person he loved and respected. And some things you simply do not act on no matter how loud they get inside your chest. So Michael buried it. He pressed it down so far and so deep that he almost convinced Himself it was not there at all. But then John died, and suddenly the thing Michael had buried was standing right in front of him with nowhere left to hide. This is where Francesca's story becomes almost too complicated to sit with comfortably, because Michael loving her was not simple. It was not a clean, straightforward thing she could just accept or reject and move on from. It came tangled up in everything. It came tangled up in John, in the memory of John, in the loyalty she still felt toward John, in the life she had built, with John that was now sitting in ruins around her. How do you open the door to someone new when every corner of the room you are standing in still belongs to the person you lost? How do you let someone in without feeling like you are somehow erasing what came before? Francesca did not fall into Michael's arms. That is the part people sometimes get wrong when they watch this story from the outside. They see two people who eventually come together and they assume the path was straightforward. That love simply found a way and everything else sorted itself out. But that is not what happened. What happened was a war. A long, exhausting, deeply private war that Francesca fought entirely inside herself. Because loving Michael meant something terrifying. It meant accepting, on a level deeper than she had yet allowed herself to go, that John was truly gone. Not just physically gone, not just absent from the room, but gone in the permanent and irreversible way that closes a door forever. And Francesca was not ready to close that door. She did not know if she would ever be ready. Keeping it open, even just a crack, was the only way she still felt connected to the life she had lost. Every step she took toward Michael felt like a step away from John. And that guilt was not something she could simply reason her way out of. It lived in her body. It sat in her chest every time Michael looked at her in a way that was different from how a cousin looks at a widow. It woke her up at night and made her question every feeling she had and whether she had any right to feel it. And Michael was not a simple person to navigate either. He carried his own guilt, his own grief, his own complicated tangle of love and loyalty and loss. He had lost John too. He was mourning his cousin while simultaneously wrestling with feelings for that cousin's wife. Feelings he had never asked for and could not switch off. There was no version of this that was clean or easy or free from pain. Every possible path forward had thorns in it. What makes their story so uniquely heartbreaking is not that it ends badly. It does not, in the traditional sense. Francesca and Michael do find their way to each other eventually. They build something real. Something that is not a replacement for what she had with John, but something new. Something that exists alongside that grief rather than pretending it was never there. But even that, even the love that survives all of this, even the happiness that Francesca eventually allows herself to have, comes with a cost that never fully goes away. Because she will always know what it means to lose the person who was everything. She will always carry John in the part of her that learned how to love in the first place. And Michael, to his credit, never asked her to put that down. He loves her knowing he will always share her heart with a ghost. And he chooses her anyway. That is not a fairy tale. That is something much more real and much more painful than any fairy tale could ever be. Francesca Bridgerton did not get this simple, beautiful love story she originally dreamed of as a girl watching her siblings from the quiet corner of the room. She got something harder. She got love and loss woven together so tightly that you cannot separate one from the other. She got joy that is permanently shadowed by grief and grief that is slowly, imperfectly softened by joy. She got the most human love story of all of them. And that is exactly why it is the saddest one. The other Bridgertons found their person and lived. Francesca found her person, lost him, had to learn who she was without him, and then had to decide, in the middle of all that pain, whether she was brave enough to love again knowing exactly what love costs.